Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's final DLC, the Indigo disc, is coming out soon. This DLC has been super hyped up, so there's a lot of hopes for what's going to come with it. And today I wanted to talk about the 10 things that we need to see in the DLC that would improve the game a lot. The first thing I'd really like to see come back in the Indigo disc DLC would be an equivalent of a bottle cap. So what I mean by that is a bottle cap that can do the opposite of what a regular bottle cap does. Bottle caps, as of right now, when you use them, will max out the individual values of a Pokemon, IVs for short. And what that does is it lets them reach the maximum stat potential that they can reach with the stat. But sometimes Pokemon don't want to have the max stat, right? They want to be slower, or they want to have less attack so they can take less from foul play. This is really important for competitive players because right now you can only sometimes get one of each exclusive Pokemon. A perfect example of this would be like Ursaluna Blood Moon. You can only get one copy of it in your game, right? So if you only have one game, it makes it really tough to get other Ursalunas with different stats. There's Ursaluna teams that want the Ursaluna to be max speed so they can run it really fast with Tailwind. And then there's also Ursaluna Blood Moon teams that want to use it in Trick Room, which means they need zero speed, right? But if you use the bottle cap on the IV on speed to max it out, then you can't bring it back down to zero. So you have to kind of pick and choose what kind of Pokemon you want. And it makes it harder to get into the game sometimes, or to get Pokemon that you need to build competitively viable teams. So having a rusty bottle cap would definitely help even out the field and allow everyone to get the Pokemon they need to compete properly, instead of having to get multiple of the same Pokemon to just use multiple teams. So the second thing I'd really like to see in the upcoming DLC would be returning Pokemon, particularly the Tapus. For those of you who don't know who the Tapus are kind of Gen 7's equivalent to Gen 9's Treasures of Ruin. And the Tapus were kind of the equivalent of that in Gen 7. Now, the Tapus are actually very competitively relevant. They have really good abilities, they have really good stats. And right now, the metagame is very centralized around the two Pokemon, Tornadus and Urshifu. And I think the Tapu's introduction would help kind of balance out the format and metagame a little bit to where we'd have a bit more variety in terms of the teams we'd be seeing and the Pokemon that are being used. Specifically because a Pokemon like Tapu Koko, who sets electric terrain on switch-in, can help enable a lot of the Paradox Pokemon, specifically the future ones, and kind of make them a bit more viable in some cases. Also, another Pokemon that could be incredibly good is Tapu Fini. Tapu Fini would match up incredibly well into Urshifu. It would also help with the introduction of Incineroar, and it'd also help kind of lower the usage of Amoonguss a little bit. And Amoonguss isn't necessarily a bad Pokemon for the metagame, but it is nice to have a bit of variety and have more counterplay to common strong tools in the metagame. A really nice feature that would be useful to come back, especially for both casual and competitive players, would be the versus recorder. Now, this is something that's been discussed previously, and people have brought this up a lot. I think that the versus recorder would be good because being able to record games, especially on a casual level and then also on a competitive level, would be really helpful for players, right? From a casual perspective, if there's a fun battle you have that you really like, you can actually save it and remember it, right? Especially if you played versus a friend or something. You could also use them to kind of review your games in practice, even if you're just a competitor, right? And as well too, kind of leaning into this whole match recording, match area of topic pretty much. I think a big thing that could also be improved is a good spectator mode. So we had spectator mode back in Sword and Shield, and it was used a lot for competitive matches, but unfortunately it seems that it's kind of gone on the back burner a little bit in Scarlet and Violet. So I think it would be really cool if for the DLC they actually made sure that they included a really good spectator mode, or at least worked on it, so it could be usable for the general public. Something that would be really cool to introduce in the Indigo Mask DLC would be a good battle tower feature. So we've had a battle tower previously. We had it in Sword and Shield, and we've had previous iterations of these kind of like battle focused areas. So Battle Maison, I think it's called, and then also the Battle Frontier. There's a lot of cool ways that you can go about adding these extra battles to the game, and it would definitely help with giving Scarlet and Violet extra content post game. Now, from a competitive player standpoint as well, it would be another great way to be able to grind out resources. And also too, I think it'd be a cool way to bridge the gap between casual and competitive, especially with the focus of this DLC being more challenging. It would actually be really cool if they could include a battle tower that would actually challenge you with those battles and kind of add an extra fun feature into the game. I think it definitely adds a lot to a Pokemon game when they have features like this. I even remember in BDSP, which wasn't the most beloved remake, it at least had a really fleshed out battle tower, which made it really entertaining to play. And I definitely wish that they would kind of take those features and bring it forward into the newer games. This next one is just a completely gameplay focused thing. I think having full flight with the dragons in game would be really cool. I know it had already been teased that you were going to be able to fly with the dragons, but there's no real confirmation that you'll be able to 100% fly all the time. I think including this would just be a no-brainer, so I would be surprised if it wasn't included, but hopefully they do, because I think being able to just fly around with the dragons would be really convenient instead of having to run around everywhere. Of course, you can just like quick travel on the map, but sometimes you want to get to certain areas that are a little bit out of the way, and just being able to fly with Miraidon and Koraidon would just be cool, and it'd just be like a fun, you know, feature in general, right? I remember being able to fly around on the Lotties in Oras, right? And it was really cool because you could just kind of fly them around a town, like go anywhere you wanted. I think a feature like that would be really cool, just include in Scarlet and Violet. Not necessarily where it can like go to special areas, but just more so the fact that you can just fly wherever you want, right? It's easier mobility. It's just a quality of life change. So one thing that's actually very impactful to both casual and competitive players is the fact that there are a lot of Pokemon that are exclusive to Pokemon Home Transfer. Now, from a competitive perspective, obviously this is very bad because sometimes you want to get access to Pokemon that you can't normally get access to unless you have another game, which does create kind of this like paywall aspect to it to players who are just kind of getting into the games in Scarlet and Violet. One kind of main example of this is a Pokemon like Urshifu, right? You can only really access Urshifu when you have Sword and Shield. So if you don't have Sword and Shield, you can't transfer it up. So what I'm hoping is that there will be encounters for like the non-Scarlet Violet Pokemon. Obviously, we have a lot of legendaries confirmed, but you know, if there's going to be some home transfer exclusives, I hope that they would at least include like an opportunity to catch at least one of them in Scarlet and Violet, because then it makes it more accessible to a lot of players. Even from a casual perspective, you want to be able to catch everything, right? Even if it's from previous generations. So I think it would be really nice if they allowed competitive players, especially, to be able to get Pokemon that are normally really hard to obtain through transfers, and it makes it very easy and very accessible for players who are just getting into competitive in Scarlet and Violet. One quality of life change that would be really impactful for both casual and competitive players would be the change to the scaling of Terra raids once you have beaten the post game. Like when you've beaten all the campaigns and you've beaten the Area 0 section in Paldea. Right now, you can still roll 3 and 4 star raids even when you've fully beaten all the stories of the game, including Area 0, which is not really that helpful because you want to actually be getting access to the 5 and 6 star raids consistently so you can be getting more Terra shards and getting more resources for in-game. You're not going to be able to do that that well if you're getting 3 and 4 star raids, so I feel like once you've beaten the post game of Area 0, you should be able to just get consistent 5 and 6 star raids. Like there should be no reason why you're getting 4 or 3 stars. It's not really helpful to the player at all if you're trying to build up resources. And ideally, if you have the DLC, right, the Kitakami Dex, then you have that item that allows you to get more Terra shards. So you're going to be getting a lot of Terra shards if you roll 5 and 6 star raids, which is why ideally you'd be able to get more of those in that aspect. The next section is really just about returning moves and some like cool moves that I think could really make an impact with the DLC. Pokemon moves actually make a really big difference in terms of how viable they are, and I feel like there are a lot of cool introductions of like moves and kind of ideas that you could include to make the game a little more enjoyable and make certain Pokemon better. So one of the main moves that I think of that got removed after Generation 7 is Snatch. Snatch is a really cool move where basically you use it, it has a really high priority bracket, and if another Pokemon uses a status move, it could be anything, Belly Drum, Bulk Up, it could be Tailwind, you basically steal it for yourself. And I thought that that move was a really technical and like high skill level move, so it's actually a really like cool move to include in the DLC. So something like that would be a really cool introduction. Another move I think of is Skydrop. Skydrop will basically have the user launching itself at the opponent, picking it up and taking it into the sky. If the opponent moves after the Skydrop animation, or it was supposed to, it won't be able to move that turn. It will move obviously after you lower it back down with Skydrop, but you could basically set up really cool plays where you Skydrop something to trap it, and you can then attack it with the other partner. And then the final move that I'd really like to see come back that I think would just help a lot of Pokemon would be Meteor Beam, and maybe some equivalent for other types. Meteor Beam is a move that's like a charge move. It basically builds up the user's special attack as it's charging the move, and then it fires off a beam. Using that with Power Herb obviously makes like a lot of Pokemon stronger and can use that coverage a bit better. So Lunala was a big example of that in restricted format in 2022, but also there are a lot of other Pokemon that can capitalize off of that, and like maybe even an equivalent of that would be really cool to see with other types. So hopefully we get to see that going forward. Another quality of life change that would be really impactful to Scarlet and Violet would be lag fixes. So this is something people have been talking about forever. If you look at any Scarlet and Violet video, especially upon its release, there was a lot of talk about the performance issues of the game. What I really hope is something that can be resolved in the Indigo disc is the actual lag issues. There is still a decent bit of lag sometimes when you go across certain areas in Paldea, and hopefully in the Indigo disc, they make sure that this doesn't exist. I definitely think it would be helpful if they can finally fix the performance and frame rate issues of each area, because it just helps become more immersed in the experience when the game isn't lagging a lot. And I think that overall the game definitely has the potential to be one of the best games of all time in terms of Pokemon. For the final thing I hope to see in the DLC, it's actually going to be related to Area Zero. So obviously Paradox Pokemon have been a big staple in the competitive metagame since their introduction, so I really hope to see a kind of expansion on that, whether it means more Paradox Pokemon, because more Paradox Pokemon would always be really cool. I would love to see them kind of explore more concepts with other Pokemon besides legendaries in terms of Paradox Pokemon. But if they're unable to do that, I think another really cool way that you could kind of impact the game would be through hidden abilities for the Paradox Pokemon. Of course, you know, you need to make sure they're balanced enough, because there are a lot of Paradox Pokemon that are already pretty strong. So the chance of a hidden ability could definitely like unbalance them a little bit. So I definitely think you'd have to be careful about it. But there are some really cool applications to hidden abilities on the on the Area Zero Pokemon. So hopefully that's something that we get to see, or at least more Paradox Pokemon, because it is the coolest part of this game by far. And I think that expanding on that would be awesome. So those are the top 10 things I'd like to see coming in the next DLC. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know down below what you guys would like to see in the upcoming DLC. I always love seeing your guys' thoughts and having new ideas for what can be coming in the future DLC. Thank you guys so much for all the support. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take it easy. Bye.